Welcome to my channel. Hi everybody, and welcome back to my channel and to another episode of Missing Kids. So if you recall, the last time that we spoke about Tinafontaine, I highlighted the brief details about her story, and then I went into the history and the context of her mother and her mother's childhood, Valentina Fontaine, which was so tragic, guys. And so today, I think I want to continue with the historical context of the location where Tina and her family actually originates. Throughout this little episode, and I hope I can keep it brief, we're going to be talking about geographical location, a bit of culture, history, and Treaty 1. And so the Sagkeeng First Nation is actually a Treaty 1 First Nation in Eastman Region, Manitoba, Canada. And it is composed mostly of the, I hope I can pronounce this, Anishinaabe people to the area at or near Fort Alexander Indian Reserve Number 3, or actually just Fort Alexander, which is along the Winnipeg River and Traverse Bay. And so today, the Sagkeeng tribe holds territory in southern Lake Winnipeg, 120 kilometers north of Winnipeg, and on mainland as well. By this past June of 2021, the Sagkeeng Reserve totaled a population of 8,208 band members and over 3,600 members in the reserve and over 4,500 beyond it. So it's rather a large tribe. Because the reserve is located on the north and south shores of Winnipeg River, the name Sagkeeng actually derives from an Ojibwe term, which is zagging, like zigzag, zagging, meaning actually, literally, mouth of the river. And so it is near the northern border of Alexander, which is bordering the town of Pine Falls. Now, let's get into a little bit of history. The Sagkeeng territory includes land within what we call Treaty 1. And so that includes lands north and east of Winnipeg River. I guess, in other words, the Sagkeeng region is considered a Treaty 1 nation, and its members, or rather, it is a member of Treaty 3 and 5, as all treaties 1, 3, and 5, okay? 1, 3, and 5, and I'm not going to go into what the treaties are. They basically outline the boundaries of a region. And so treaties 1, 3, and 5 were inhabited by the Sagkeeng. So that means that the Sagkeeng is a member of the Grand Council of Treaty Number 3. So more specifically, the converging at the Sagkeeng territory are the territory treaty boundaries of the Northern Territory of Turtle Island, Southern Plains Territory, and Eastern Turtle Island. And so together, they make up this treaties 1, 3, and 5. That's what I'm getting out of this. Roughly, altogether, those treaties encompass a geographical area of 140,000 square kilometers, or 55,000 square miles. So, yeah, that's big. And now a bit about their culture, and it is mostly because this is originating back to ancient tribes that have been in existence for thousands of years. It is mostly an oral culture. And so, therefore, storytelling is one of the most important aspects of this Sagkeeng and Anishinaabe tribal life. And so people there believe that stories do create different worlds, and that is such a fascinating perspective to hold. I also believe that stories are an essential part of generational connection by way of teaching, for instance, the older to the younger. Oral and listening as well. So for them, and as many other cultures as well, oral storytelling is learning and listening. Listening is all part of the process. And so these activities facilitate a connection with the non-human and natural world. And I believe that these tribes, these wonderful, fascinating, and amazing tribes, connect very deeply with nature and the non-human world in ways that are absolutely unimaginable. I don't think that we connect in the same way that they can, because they actually just have a very entirely different perspective, which is absolutely beautiful. In many other cultures, oral storytelling is usually considered unimportant and behind the times. I think modern technology and digital information has contributed to that kind of unfortunate attitude. I know that where my dad comes from, storytelling is still very much alive because the people there believe that they are losing their culture. And I know that many old ancient cultures do go through this. Some of them come out of it okay and succeed in making their lives feel more important to them by keeping that oral tradition alive, and others don't manage to get past that attitude. And so, yeah, that's kind of sad. It's considered for the Sagkeeng tribe unimportant by the colonial settlers in their society when they began to arrive in the 1800s. And so, however, this form of communication and connection and teaching has somehow retained a lot of its importance and beauty. This oral culture and storytelling, the custom itself, has been used for centuries and is still very much used to pass down tribal traditional beliefs from one generation to another. And I am right now wondering how alive that tradition still was in the very family of the Fontaines and Valentina's side as well. How much did they rely on oral storytelling to keep their culture alive? You know what I'm saying? Were they displaced from it, or were they very much a part of it? I'm not sure, because where I stand now, there's no real information as to how exactly Tina and Valentina were raised according to this culture. I would imagine that if they were somewhat reliant on the custom of storytelling, I think it might have been very influential in a positive way, because storytelling is often used to teach life lessons that relate to traditional as well as current beliefs. So there's often this one side being presented in juxtaposition with the other side, which is very interesting. In some traditional tribal stories, the Nana Bush or Amik, the beaver, and Nokomis, the grandmother figure, are very, very important cultural characters central to the creation stories. And tribal stories also feature activities and actions that involve, how do I say this, generation, and the idea of generation and regeneration, an important concept among tribal people. And examples of these important cultural aspects are participation in ceremonies, experimentation with new ideas, and meeting different and new people, reflection on the outcome of certain situations, and also different and new sorts of events, such as participating in other people's cultural ceremonies. Nana Bush stories do carry a message to young people that it is really okay to make mistakes, and that things are not always as black and white as they may appear in different cultural traditions that belong to other people. And I think I can really relate to that. And so This is, for instance, very different from how many settler colonial stories took place, which they clearly defined the good guy and the bad guy, one apart from the other. Well, in these Nanabush stories, the good guy and the bad guy were not always quite so clearly separate. And actually, um, I know that other cultures kind of conform to this sort of thinking. These good and bad figures kind of mesh together and are almost impossible to differentiate one from another, if you know what I'm saying. For the creation story, some of the most popular parts of that story um, involve the turning of syrup into maple trees, in maple trees, into sap. So the syrup in trees turns to sap, and that is part of the creation process for these tribal people. So clearly, that kind of nature is miraculous and magical in its own way to everybody, but especially to these tribal people. The maple sap story infers to three different distinct ages of life, if you will, just like the great chains of being that we all studied in high school. And they are actually, in the tribal world, split up into three main categories. And that would be the first, ancient, the second being golden, and the third being the present. So the Sagkeeng tribe holds its annual celebratory treaty days in the last week of July. The 5 to 6 days of events are basically open to everyone and include a community parade, children's events, a 3-day powwow, and many beautiful fireworks. And so I'm sure that is just scratching the surface. It must be heavenly to be there. And I remember as a child, I've never been to Sault Ste. Marie, but I have been to other lakes that were close by. And I remember going one July, the year that I was 6, because I was so fascinated by Indians, more so than cowboys, right? And I remember being so fascinated with all these different festivities that were going on. We rented out a little cabin, and my parents and I still have photos. I remember being absolutely mesmerized by a beautiful totem pole and all these celebrations that took place in the village. It was a beautiful holiday, and I walked away from that holiday feeling like a different person. I was just a little girl. In the 1800s, or maybe even prior to that, the territory of the Sagkeeng region commenced 1 mile upstream from Fort Alexander's trading post, which was formerly occupied by the Hudson Bay Company. And I find that so fascinating and thrilling. And I I guess I still have to wonder why the things at Hudson Bay, or the Bay, are still so uh, outrageously pricey at times. Mind you, they carry wonderful and amazing things, beautiful fashions for everybody all around, and wonderful personal items, and everything that you can imagine. I just love looking around and shopping there. However, if I spend too much time, I will eventually, clear out my wallet completely. Now, the gathering and trading areas of Fort Alexander were, with its people, a component of a copper culture. And so this is typically regarded as pretty ancient. And if you want to go back to the Copper Age. And what makes that evident is the copper points and artifacts that are found in the area. And so I find that so fascinating. Let's talk a little bit more about Fort Alexander. In 1734, La Vérendrye, I'm sorry guys, this is a person I'm talking about. He built a fur trading post, which was called Fort Maurepas on the north side of the Winnipeg River, north of the present-day Sagkeeng, Manitoba area, which was abandoned at the end of the colonial period. And I wonder why, but I'm not going to get into that. Later, Toussaint Louverture, a Northwest Company clerk, built a post on the south side of the mouth of Lake Winnipeg, and it was called Fort Basse de la Rivière, and functioned, now French was never my strong point, you have to realize that. It functioned as the capital of the Northwest Lake Winnipeg district. Wow. And so it became very important. It was important to the point where it was a provisioning post, a trading post for both the native and immigrant canoe settlers. I don't know who else would have been involved in that area in the trade that was going on then. And so bags of pemmican bought from the Lake Winnipeg posts on the upper Assiniboine River were stored there among other goods. And I imagine that many of those went on to become everyday household items. So it is very interesting. And I'm sure that I could get into this, but we all know that we can research on our own. If you're interested, there's so much more that you can find out about the trading that went on there. I actually am very fascinated by it, but I don't want to get off track. And so this next part is also very fascinating. It talks about the Hudson Bay Company, and this company operated there at that post, from 1795 to 1801, which is not that long. But in 1807, Alexander Mackay rebuilt the post on a nearby site. So he kind of, I don't know what difficulties might have popped up, but he moved the post. And so beginning in 1808, the new post was known as Fort Alexander. And that is how Fort Alexander actually came to be, rather than just simply Lake Winnipeg, or, you know what I'm saying? So, since big game of the area had been overexploited by immigrants, in the late 1700s, fish garden vegetables were the staple foods of the area. So it was mainly fishing and vegetarian crops. And so I imagine that might be one of the reasons why they cleared the post from one spot to another. Now, by 1812, the Bas de la Rivière gardens were selling vegetables in the incoming Red River. They were selling all that produce to the incoming Red River immigrants. And so after the Northwest and Hudson Bay companies merged in 1821, I didn't know that, Fort Alexander continued to operate as a trading post to the natives and immigrants in that area, in the region. And so, wow, amazing. 1871, William Mann, or otherwise known as Hawkbird, signed Treaty 1 on behalf of the ancestors of the Sagkeeng tribe. And the Fort Alexander Indian Reserve of approximately 87.71 square kilometers, or 21,674 acres, was surveyed in 1874. So that's a big chunk of land, and a lot of people too. However, guys, as for government and institution, as we have seen already in my review of the little Frank Young, Indian boy who went missing for months and his remains were finally discovered, a very unfortunate case. He was from a different tribe, on a different reserve, but it goes the same way, right? The Canadian government always held a stance that created and nurtured a very deeply divided and very troubled and almost unnecessary, created an unnecessary hardship for this unfortunately very troubled population. Nobody needs to go through that. Our differences are what make us unique and special. They do not hold us back. And people who have not yet learned that or don't want to acknowledge that will be, in my mind at least, in the Middle Ages forever. Right, Justin? Worst part about this is it is deeply, this kind of sentiment doesn't stop with the native tribes of Canada, or America for that matter. They are deeply embedded in Canadian and, in fact, North American cultures, to the point where differences become the reason for hostility, anger, and oppression. I want to stop there. I see it every day, everywhere, in the streets, at home, in movies. There is almost a hostage-captor relationship that absolutely is obsessed, or rather officials and other people who like to go by this kind of oppression are obsessed by this hostage captor essence that permeates our relationships with other people and immigrants as well. And so I think that before we begin to expand, we have to fix this, don't we? Because in my opinion, it's not fixed. As long as there is crime and gunning and stabbing and robbery and home invasions, our work is not done. And I think that the leaders have shown a great weakness and a great relent to this type of, like they're giving in to this type of activity. And I think that we're divided. No matter how you look at it, we are divided. So I want to bring your focus to the case of Tammy and Frank Young, where we found out that thousands of children were abducted by the RCMP, torn from their family and their loved ones, and stuck into these orphan schools for no reason, for no good reason. I just don't understand it. And again, I'm going to stop there. However, those children were punished and jailed and grew up to be even more punished and more oppressed than they ever could have become. And for instance, in the past, the French Oblates of Mary Immaculate Nuns ran Fort Alexander Indian Residential School for the Native children. As typical of the Canadian residential school system, the institution practiced cultural genocide by forcing students to speak only in English and prohibiting them from practicing their own cultural language, their own cultural customs in their own ancestral land, thereby creating an ongoing legacy of trauma among the Sagkeeng and other Anishinaabe tribes. And if you think that it's all over, it's not. It's still at the height of its strength. It hasn't stopped, guys. In 2005, the Canadian government formally, and I would say this would be essentially the Ontario government, the provincial government especially, they formally acknowledged and apologized for abuses in residential schools. However, to abuse for centuries and then apologize is nothing short of ruthless or hypocritical. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. And in 2007, the Canadian government authorized a payment of, wow, they put a price tag on it. And we all know it's impossible to do that. But they did authorize a payment of a $1.9 billion compensation package to survivors forced to attend these schools. Too little and way too late. As the story of Tinafontaine and her mother, Valentina, or Duck, has shown and will show, the Sagkeeng tribe and other tribes harshly criticize the government's institution of child and family services for breaking up families and following up in a rational and logical manner rather than working to hold them together, and holding back, actually withholding the support to parents and children. And I know that this attitude is widespread, and people who are perceived as different in Canadian society are often withheld benefits. And so that brings us to the close of this this review of the Fontaine family's historical and geographical context. And so I hope that you managed to take something away from it. And next time we will begin again with the story of Tinafontaine and the events leading up to her ultimate disappearance and death.